You know when you've met the right fit in terms of a director for your project. And with Zelda, I just trusted my gut, and also obviously was impressed by the ideas that you brought to the table. You know, that too. But for me, it is in many ways a feeling. We had a similar sensibility, that we wanted to tell the story in the same way. Yeah. I heard, you know, other takes on this project, and I just think you knew what Lisa Frankenstein needed.
When I was so gung-ho that I remember being like, I'm going to immediately put a lookbook together, kind of making this homage to what she had already put so much effort into in creating this world and these characters, and then kind of showing how I would want to flesh it out. That was a big part of, you know, I think why we could meet even digitally and get along so well, as we kind of had this common language of film and references that we both loved. And all the hair. Yeah. There's so many discussions of hair.
I have always been fascinated by the Frankenstein story. You know, when I was growing up in the 80s, there were some sort of modern takes on the Frankenstein story, like Weird Science, but they always seem to be told from the male perspective. You know, what if a man could create, you know, the perfect woman? And I think even as a little girl, I thought to myself, okay, well, what would the female version be? And so for me, I had never really had an opportunity to tell a story at that time, and I was like, I gotta do it. That's the nostalgic sweet spot for me.
I really kind of dove deep into what was popular at that exact moment as well, if I could. And once we had Kathryn too, I think a lot more of that started to come together, because you can start fleshing out the costumes and things, and that really, for me, helped me grasp the world we were going to make. Like, between Kathryn and Carla, that was like so much of the fashion and the hair and the things we wanted to approach. When I first read the script, I was so excited to, you know, read a female character that was so unapologetically silly and unhinged and delightful, and she was still going through quite a lot. She was still, you know, navigating grief and navigating young love and navigating being an outsider. But in those struggles for her, she was quite like effervescent and really, really fun to read, and all of that dialogue is on the page. Like, Lisa, in particular, was so specifically a woman that I would have related to at that age range, especially the conversations, because I will say there's so much, you'll read scripts and there's a lot of personality that the actors have to bring to things. Like, they kind of have to invent, how do I make a fully realized character out of what otherwise feels very bland? And there's like no blandness in any of the choices of these characters. They're so fully realized on the page. So like, actors, I felt like they especially really understood, even going in, the kind of person they were going to be. And it was so delightful to get to watch them fill up a larger-than-life character, as opposed to someone having to take a smaller character and build upon it. Like, they really just felt like they were in this big, wonderful space to like expand as far as they could.
And I love to hear that. And you directed those performances so beautifully, so it's just, watching this script come alive was a real privilege for me.
Visually, I had a couple that I really leaned into, and obviously there's certainly a love for Tim Burton that is present, but I did lean a lot more towards Almodovar's love of color. In Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, there's so much of this beautiful bright red, and we tried to bring some of that into the film. Like, the rabbit is this, what Paola and I were calling Almodovar red, and Lisa wears it a couple times, and the school has a lot of that, that I wanted to kind of pay homage to that. American Werewolf in London, the way that they would light night in the 80s was very specific. There was this kind of aquamarine blue that was so common in movies of that era, and I really wanted nighttime to have these highlights, these neon highlights that I think they fell out of favor in the late 90s and early 2000s, and they're starting to come back. And a movie I'm very, very fond of, Death Becomes Her, was one that I do think, especially both tonally and visually, was very informative for me. How they did the violence in the film as well, which, you know, depending on how you shoot violence, can either be funny or incredibly harrowing. And I tried to lean towards that 80s and early 90s kind of camp violence that becomes a bit more, not slapstick, but it's just fun. There's something so fun about it, and it doesn't leave you being like horrified, I feel like, most of the time. When you're building a set, you can kind of play God and make exactly what you want, but anytime it's locations, which we really lucked out on, like the Pink House was That's a real house. That's someone lives there. We didn't build those things, but you have to find them, and so sometimes you have to be quite flexible. There was a different house we were going to use first, but they didn't. Their HOA wouldn't let us film there at very last minute, so we very, very kind of quickly had to put together finding a new house, and the pink one is what we wound up with. And it so perfectly suits the film, but you do have to be ready and on your toes to maybe not have some of that stuff go your way. The high school, too, we lucked out with, because most of the high schools were very, like, current day high school. And the one we found was so interesting and so different with those big red lockers. Like, we didn't paint that. I just remember walking in and going, there's my favorite red. Okay, we're good.
Well, with Liza Swallows, her name says it all. She's really been holding it all in. She's really been keeping it inside. She has lost her mother and has kind of been discouraged from thoroughly processing that grief. Everybody just wants her to move on. And she understandably is not able to. You know, she's been deeply traumatized. Falling in love with this dead man, with this corpse, allows her to literally embrace her grief and find her way back to the land of the living. The theme of young women sort of coming into their power and perhaps being corrupted by it is something that I have visited time and time again in my work. And Liza is probably the most powerless, the most submissive lead that I've ever written. So it was especially satisfying to watch her become confident and murderous even.
We had quite a few chats about her wig.
Well, when you first told me that Kathryn was going to have this big curly red hair, I remember thinking, I'm here for it, but I have no idea how this is going to look. Yeah. And then when I saw it, I thought, this is it. Like, it is just the excess of the 80s, and so romantic, too. That color is just, like, beautiful.
Well, because Kathryn has quite glamorous, like, blonde hair, and I didn't want to do the thing that I think so many movies are prone to, which is like if they want the girl to be the unpopular loner girl, they'll give her like really bad bangs or something.
Yeah.
I wanted to give her like a full head of really luscious hair. It's just like maybe she doesn't know how to style it, or maybe she's just kind of hasn't come into her own yet. It wasn't because she's, you know, we're not putting weird glasses and like ill-fitting clothes. It was like she's cute. She just doesn't quite have a grasp on her confident womanhood yet. So the big red curls for me was a really fun addition to it because I think her blonde hair just felt so put together, and I kind of wanted something that you could like electrify and be quite its own character.
Yeah.
Especially when she's like running and doing stuff. It's like bouncing everywhere. It was great.
Creature is a very chivalrous and romantic man, and he wants Liza. He's in love with her. And I think in a lot of ways, he also just wants to have human experiences again, such as, like, you know, we see him play the piano, and for me that was so important, this idea that he had a whole life, you know, before, that he was a composer, that he finds so much joy in being able to use his hands again. You know, we all know that life can be difficult, but at the same time, like, we're out here having these experiences, and it's a gift. And so for him to have a second chance at that, you have to wonder how electrifying that must be, no pun intended.
For me, I wanted him to be an homage to a different era of leading man as well, so we played a lot with, you know, Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin. Just from a directing standpoint, to wrap my head around, it's why I had Cole go and do mime work. I wanted him to go and take mime classes, and he ended up loving it so much. That version of life that sometimes people fall into your lap and sometimes they're not the thing you were looking for, and sometimes it's a complete mistranslation or misinterpretation. They still fulfill a really lovely thing for each other. I mean, also a very unhinged thing for each other, but I'm very fond of the idea that she comes to love him and he's patient in waiting for that to happen. Because that's a huge part of what he kind of navigates in the movie, is being like, she'll come around if I just am listening and I'm here for her and I care about her.
They also have this kind of symbiotic relationship where he gets rid of people that she no longer needs in her life, and she in turn supplies him with body parts. Is it a dysfunctional relationship? Yes. But it's also, I think, quite beautiful.
Especially in her age range, I really wanted to find someone that not only could carry a whole film, but could do so with like so much humor and so much kind of willingness to go completely silly. And particularly this being a movie that is meant to be an homage and also take place in the 80s, I wanted someone who was willing to do that. And she was the only one I met that I really just knew immediately. She had this delightful, silly energy right off the bat. Like, she immediately introduced me to her 3 poodles. And she has a large one, a medium one, and a small one. And they're identical. So she has like Matryoshka doll poodles. And she was such a openly, earnestly sweet nerd that I was like, this works. I can see being able to push you to then be weirder and get bigger and bigger without you feeling ashamed of it. Because so many women are made to feel ashamed by being silly or being big and being funny, and she wasn't. It was such a perfect fit from the word go. Creature was always going to be an interesting part to cast because he's a male lead who doesn't speak. And I wasn't sure how many men were going to be gung-ho about that. But I've known Cole for years now. We've been really, really close friends for years. And I remember in getting this and being like, oh, this is Buster Keaton as a zombie, I just had an inkling that I think he would have enjoyed the challenge. And he certainly did. He was so excited.
Yeah, I was so enchanted by his enthusiasm from day one. I mean, he really was excited to play this role.
It's a romantic comedy that happens to have a murderous zombie in it.
Yeah.
Because horror, I do think it still falls under an umbrella. Horror is a really wide umbrella. There's just nothing scary, really, in this movie. So, yes, does it still fall into the horror world for me? Sure. But those elements weren't even things I had to really particularly worry about. Like, that was Cole being a zombie. That was them murdering some people. Like, that was on the page. The tone I ended up pursuing was more comedy and chemistry and the world that we were in, kind of having a, not feeling like this world. I did want to make it feel a little bit stepped outside of our day-to-day life, even the 80s day-to-day life.
So I love dabbling in multiple genres, but I don't usually have a choice because I have sat down and attempted to write straight dramas or straight horror more times than I can count, and every time it winds up veering into comedy. Because I can't help myself. Like, I just see the absurdity in everything. You gotta go to the movies, you gotta get your popcorn, you gotta do it just like you would have in 1989, and watch this movie and enjoy the experience of seeing it with an audience, laughing together, and just, that's the joy of a film like this. Also, Zelda created such a beautiful, bright, immersive film that you want to see it on the big screen.
You're supposed to laugh and have these funny reactions to these deaths. They're not, they're silly on purpose, they're fun on purpose, they're raucous on purpose. And so seeing that with an audience is kind of the only way you'll get that experience.